Jesus is teaching in the synagogue. Now, this is what he used to do. First thing he did when he came into a town or a new community is he would go to the synagogue. Now, we see that right at the beginning of his ministry in Capernaum, and we see it again and again. Now, he's on one of these visits, one of these occasions, when he notices a woman who's been crippled for 18 years. She was bent over. She couldn't stand straight, so it was very obvious to the eye that something was seriously wrong. When he saw her, he called her forward. Now, this is very different than some of the healings that take place. You remember the blind man on the edge of the town cries out for help. No, Jesus calls her forward. He calls out to her. He laid his hand on her, and she was healed and praised God. Now, you would imagine, if you've been a witness to this happening, you've been in the congregation, the crowd, whatever we might call them on that day, when this happened, you might feel that this is a time for great joy. You might have been glad at such an outcome. Well, let me read to you what the reaction was, certainly of some that were there. We read in verses 14 through to 16. Indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, the synagogue leaders said to the people, "There are 6 days for work, so come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath." The Lord answered him, "You hypocrites, doesn't each one of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or your donkey from the stall and lead it out to give water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, who Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day from what bound her?" You see, Jesus didn't want this woman to suffer a minute longer than need be. Now, the length of her illness is important. Now, this is in Luke's gospel, and Luke is the doctor, Dr. Luke. 18 years, what an embarrassment to a doctor, but something important for him to communicate. She's been ill for 18 years. You'd imagine in this Israeli-Palestinian context that somebody who'd been ill for that length of time, it's amazing they're still alive, really. And being ill for that period of time would have meant they were well known within the community. This is a classic confrontation, if you like, between Jesus and the synagogue leaders. It's something that begins very early in the gospel narratives, this tension between them. And really, it comes to a head really as much as when it happened as anything else. It's not that he healed, it's when he healed. It compares the needs of the system and the needs of the person. The needs of the system are to keep the rules. The needs of the system are to make sure on the Sabbath that nothing that is, if you like, unseemly, shouldn't happen, is inappropriate, happens. And yet the needs of this woman are so powerful. And Jesus holds up those needs. And he says that the woman needs to be set free, Sabbath day or not. And this whole, if you like, confrontation of Jesus with the religious leaders centers in many ways around the Sabbath, of whether he should be working on the Sabbath. Now, verse 17, the verse that carries on from what I just read, tells me that although they felt indignant as religious leaders, though they felt that this was the wrong thing to happen, that's not the reaction of everybody. For in verse 17, in the same passage we read, when he said this, all his opponents were humiliated, but the people were delighted with all the wonderful things he was doing. So, if you like, it was creating, like it or not, those people that were set on keeping the rules and those people who were welcoming the ministry of Jesus into the community and the powerful things that he was doing, exemplified by bringing release and healing and if you like, freedom to somebody bound for 18 years. And at the same time, doing the works of God, because that really is important. Not just keeping the law, but doing the works of God. I wonder if sometimes those same issues are around. When we had our conversation a few minutes ago, I was talking to somebody involved in professional arts and entertainment. So many Christians might look and tut at what they see at people in these particular areas and saying, oh, this isn't what we expect. They're just replaying, if you like, what the religious leaders of the days of Jesus were doing, who were expressing their tut-tuts in terms of what they thought was appropriate and what they certainly thought was inappropriate. You see, Jesus is prepared to cross the line. Jesus is prepared to confront the situations that need to be confronted. But why? Because his compassionate heart was reaching out. When Jesus called this woman across, I don't know how far she walked, but I suspect she was stood at the back. She was stood in a corner. She was stood away from where Jesus was and other religious leaders. And as she came forward, so people saw who was coming forward. And what is worse, when he touched her and brought healing to her life. Now, I don't know how and what that meant, but I suspect the healing would have a dramatic aspect to it. It would certainly be something that those who observed it would never, ever forget. It was something powerful. It was something that communicated love and the peace of God. And so as soon as that happened, the indignant people stepped in. Aren't you glad that our Saviour was willing to confront in situations like that? Aren't you glad that what we see is something that brings faith and hope to those who are watching, causing great delight at what they observed, at what Jesus was doing?